From interviewing various people who grew up in places like Evanston and the suburbs, they've all said that the education they got in the arts by growing up in an area like that has benefited them immensely.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I went to a great parochial school from kindergarten through 8th grade, and it was in Skokie. We lived in Evanston, and it was a great school, but at that time there wasn't really an arts program there. So I didn't really experience an arts program until I got to high school, and I went to Evanston Township, and I was blown away because I was able to take like an AP art class where we created a portfolio and like visual art, and the theater program at Evanston Township was amazing. I felt like a whole new world was opened up to me.
Is that where you decided this was where you wanted to take your life in performance?
I think so, at least in a more realistic way. My parents are both actors, my mom and my dad, and so myself and my brothers and sister sort of grew up going to the theater and around the theater, but I never really did any acting until I got to high school. And I guess I finally started doing it, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved the camaraderie of rehearsal. I loved meeting the people. I felt like I was meeting people that were as weird as I was. That was very comforting, you know. So yeah, I think that's where it kind of clicked, and I went, I think I want to do this. I think this feels good.
You did so much here in Chicago. Is there a particular experience theatrically that stands out for you? Anything at Marriott, Lincolnshire?
I mean, there are for different reasons. Every show has its special something, and I remember kind of where I was in my life when it happened. But Shenandoah at the Marriott is one I remember as being a really special one. It was my first time working with David Bell. It was my first time working at the Marriott, I think. And I had grown up going to shows there as a little kid, and I remember those people coming out of the stage door, and I always wanted to work there. And it was just a very special show, too. The whole cast just kind of clicked, and my dad was in it, my sister was in it, and I think that and Carousel at the Court are two that really sort of stand out to me.
You've got a lot of praise here, like you won Best Performer in Chicago 2011. Does that affect your confidence? Is it a nice gesture, or is it just something you don't even try to consider?
Awards are strange and wonderful things. I always think it's so interesting because it does good things, and I know that also for marketing purposes, it does the outside work in the way a review does, is it sort of puts a stamp of approval on something that hopefully will get people into a theater, or it can sort of open you up to different audiences. But then on another level too, I always hope that it's sort of a nod for a job well done, and that it's people recognizing that your work was good and it meant something and you affected people. But it's also funny because it's art. You know, how do you measure art? If you can get, you know, an award for science because you figured out how to cure cancer, but it's like, you know what I mean? It's not a definite thing. So it's sort of a mystery to me, but it's a lovely thing. It always feels good to be acknowledged for something that you work so hard at and you put your heart into. It can be a strange thing, too.
Yeah.
You want to be grateful, but I think part of being an actor is always doubting yourself and going, was I good? I don't know if I was good.
Yeah.
I wonder if I'm terrible, and that's what makes you like go out and try again.
Was there something in particular that you took away from doing theater here in Chicago that you've kind of used throughout your career, leading you know, onto Broadway?
I think what I took away from it in general was just concentration on the work. I've been so blessed to have amazing opportunities in New York, but I remember the first time I walked into a rehearsal room in Chicago, and I saw the actors that I had grown up watching, and I couldn't believe I was in the same room with them. I love performing, but I love rehearsal too. Like, I love being in a room with people and trying to figure stuff out and trying to figure out a script and figure out all the different ways a scene could go and things like that. And I think we pride ourselves on that in Chicago, our sort of raw storytelling, the way we sort of attack pieces, you know what I mean? We go from the inside out because we don't necessarily have all the huge marketing and the bells and whistles, you know, huge venues in some of the Broadway houses and stuff like that. You know, in some ways it's a blessing. There's not the money. There's not the razzle-dazzle all the time. So, like, you have to start with the core stuff, which is storytelling, and I think that's the biggest thing I took away from Chicago. And all the people that I worked with and came to love there, you know, who are still my best friends, there's a humility there, too. People live and work in that city, and they do wonderful work, and they have fulfilling lives. You know what I mean? That's always going to be a part of how I would like to see my trajectory.
Your first role on Broadway, did you feel like you were ready for your Broadway debut? Was there nervous excitement, or was it just like, this is the natural progression of things?
It was mixed. I mean, I think there were certain things I was ready for, and some things were a whirlwind. I mean, when I got in the rehearsal room, I knew what I was doing. When I was on the stage, I knew what I was doing. It's all the same work, no matter where you are. There's differences if you're in like a black box theater, if you're in a Broadway house, but the essentials of the work are the same. And I felt like I was very well prepared for that with the training I received in school and the work I was able to do in Chicago. Then there were other things that I wasn't prepared for, like the press stuff and people asking me questions and having my picture taken, and that sort of press angle of it doesn't exist to the extent that it does here in Chicago. And I'm still learning because that's part of it now. That's part of the work. It's just all very new to me.
Did you find that working with people like Carrie Connick and Shivia Rivera and Amy Adams and Donna Murphy helped that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Harry was like an angel. He was like a big brother to me during the whole Clear Day experience. And I would ask him questions about stuff. He was so great. It wasn't like he was giving me advice. The best thing he did was he led by example. I don't even know if he knew he was doing it, but I was certainly watching. And the way that he handled himself and led the company and his attitude and his work ethic, like that was the best experience. I mean, same thing with, like you said, Donna and Amy and Cheetah. Cheetah was the masterclass every day, just watching her work and her positive attitude and the way she carried herself, you know, the sort of icon, but she also had such a humility to her and such a gratitude for the experience she's had in her life, both personal and professional. I've just been so blessed to be able to work with people like that who are at a certain point in their careers and are still really lovely people.
There was clearly a tiny bit of buzz going for you by the time Beautiful came around. What was the audition process like?
It was fairly normal. The first round was sort of more of a meeting with the writer, Mark, our director, and I think Jason, our music director, was there, and possibly Paul Blake, our main producer. I'm trying to remember that first meeting. And I just sort of sat down with them, and they talked to me about the project, and they were gracious enough to just meet with me. I don't know if they just wanted to get a feel of what I was like, what my personality was. And then they had me come back, and I did a real audition and then a callback. I think it was did two scenes and sang two songs that are now in the show. Two Carole King songs. I always feel weird in auditions. It's very rare I'll come out and I'll be like, oh, that went really well. I usually come out being like, well, I don't know what happened in there. And then the final callback, there were more people there. Sherry, Carole King's manager, was there, and I'm not even sure who all else. I mean, you kind of walk into a room and there's usually a table and then there's a bunch of people behind it.
Yeah. How have you worked the vocal stylizing? Is it a little bit you, a little bit Carole King?
I tried to bring both parallelisms in and then enough of myself so that it felt authentic. When I listen to her music and when I watch her perform, I've never had the experience of watching her perform live. I hope I do someday, but, you know, concerts and things like that and clips of her performing, what I take away from it is just this authenticity. She's just so honest. So I knew I didn't want to do an imitation / couldn't do an imitation. Yeah. Our voices are very different, but there were things that I do and I worked on and continue to work on to try to give the essence of her vocals. And, you know, some of it's technical, some of it's trying to figure out how you evoke the feeling that people get when they listen to her through my voice. Like, how do I create that feeling in people? And our ranges are different, so that was fun to explore. But I think I'm singing most of the songs in the original keys. You know, she has that groundedness and the earthiness to her voice. That's some of the stuff I try to capture and use bits and pieces of that.
Has there been a distinct difference for you from playing someone like Melinda Wells to playing a real-life person like Carole King? Do you just approach it as a role?
Well, the process was different in that, of course, there was so much more source material. Mm-hmm. I mean, Melinda Wells was a creation, and there were things that I drew on as inspiration, but doing this character, Carole King is a legend, and she's alive and well and working, so, you know, my Carole is an interpretation of that. It had to be. You know, I'm a different person, but you know, the source material was there, so that's fascinating. I mean, I read her book. I have tons of pictures around my dressing room and lots of studying of clips and listening to her just to try to get into it all.
Have you met her? You mentioned her manager was...
Yes, I did. We did get to meet her. We all got to meet her. She came and surprised us on our first day back to rehearsal in New York after our San Francisco run. And it was great, and she spoke to the company, and she's just so warm and open, and it was a great reminder when we got back to New York. It would have been easy to come back and get caught up in all the hype of it all, but it was great to meet her that day, to be like, oh gosh, this is why we're doing this. This woman is so freaking special, you know?
How have you dealt with the hype? I mean, there's been a lot of Katie Couric and, you know, interviews like this. How have you dealt with that?
Carole King is a great focal point for me. It's been fascinating to study her and study her career because in all of it, she just always comes off to me just being so honest and so down to earth and so herself. And I know that that's one of the things people love about her. You know what I mean? And that's why people are coming to this show. They love her. They have a love for her. They have a connection to her music. That's what gets people in the seats.